Hello, everybody. My name is Sylvain Rochon. I am the Paradise Engineer. I haven't been making videos a lot these days because I was on holiday for most of the month of March, and then catching up has taken a while. But I decided to write an article and make a video here about overpopulation. And I like to laugh about it because the discussion is kind of silly. There's a lot of talk about problems with too much population, and approximately 2050, a lot of experts say that the planet just won't be able to sustain it, and these are all technically correct if we follow current trends of today. Um, and that's a pretty serious deal because there's just so many potatoes and vegetables and produce and food in general that a planet can produce in the arable land that we have. We have about 3.5 billion acres of arable land on the whole planet, and that's a limited resource. And it's just as simple as that. So there's just X amount of food. Now, that means that 2050 date is an estimate, of course, and using a bunch of assumptions, as scientists have given us about that date, but also a cap of population that the Earth can sustain of approximately 10 billion people. Right now, we're closing in on 8. So, in approximately 30 years from now, well, we're going to bust that 10, basically. However, there is some assumptions that they're making. So I just want to make it clear that it's not perfect, their assumption, because they are assuming that we'll be farming exactly in the same way, as in like a lot of automation, but using the flat land. So we won't be doing a lot of vertical farming, which is way more efficient in producing crops, using way less resources and land and space and so on. And also, they're not talking about the possibility of things like lab-grown meat becoming popular and replacing a lot of the livestock. Because our productivity, like the land use, a lot of it is actually to produce meat. Producing a meat uses up about 10 times more resources than producing the equivalent calorific in vegetables. So there's that too. Like if we shift some of our production or all of our production to some of these way more efficient and modern ways of farming, then we'll be able to feed more people and pack in more individuals on the planet. But of course, that's eventually that also will become a problem, because that's another way to use up resources. And I wrote an article about this not that long ago, maybe a few months ago, about how the whole Earth eventually, it's a closed chemical system. It has just so many atoms of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen available to be converted into food and back into the land and kind of recycled. And there is a hard limit, despite our potential advances in making things more compact and producing vertically and so on and so forth. There's always a limit. The planet has a finite amount of space. So why I said originally that I find it funny, the whole discussion around overpopulation, is that most people just are avoiding the solution, avoiding the real issue, which is the birth rates themselves. Because again, we can extend that 2015 mark using science. Sure. But I mean, isn't there a better way? Isn't there a better way than that? I mean, the issue of overpopulation is not the farmland, and it's not how we're farming. It's us making children, making more children than the amount of people that die. That is the crux of the issue. And we're not tackling that because there's a sacrosanct element about giving birth. It's everybody's right to give birth. And I would tend to agree that's it's a natural thing, and it would be very uncomfortable to make laws to restrict birth rates. Some countries have attempted it, like including South Korea and China. And they were very successful at reducing the birth rate for a certain period of time. In South Korea, they were so successful that now they're having a bit of a problem because there's a little bit over one child per couple that is being born right now on average in South Korea, and now the population is dwindling and decreasing. So, but it's not the regulation or the laws that are entirely responsible for the decline of the birth rates in the advanced countries like South Korea. It's actually a bit more complex than that. But that is essentially the solution, is that if we don't want to have too much population, well, we should have fewer births than deaths. Okay? Is the solution legislation? I don't think so. It could be. We could agree collectively that we have to kind of have a control over that, and that would be totally fine to me, and a lot of people would object. But if it means the survival of our species and avoiding overexploiting the planet, I mean, I think that could be okay. May compound to the fact that we are stacking a lot of pollution, that we're producing more pollution than the planet can absorb. So we can have technology to take care of that as well. That's more energy, more resources applied to that. Again, we can deal with that. But one of my concerns is that the natural spaces, there's about only 23% of the whole landmass of the planet is still wild. Now, that sounds like a fairly small number, and it kind of is, because it has been declining quite importantly, quite a lot in the last few years. But just remember that these wild spaces contains a lot of the animals that cannot coexist. They're unable to coexist naturally with man nearby, and as well as they process a lot of the CO2 in the atmosphere to produce oxygen. These areas are way more efficient at doing that than parks and in cities and so on and so forth. And of course, there's the biodiversity and the equilibrium within the biospheres that are located quite healthy in those wild spaces, and we're encroaching in those spaces. And we should stop doing that. We should have more wild spaces so that the planet keeps doing what it's supposed to be doing, because that's part of the recycling process of the planet. A lot of the biochemistry and the reabsorption of all these chemicals that we are depend on those on the wild spaces, right? The plants and the animals that live there, and how this whole ecology kind of lives and works. So how do we control the birth rates? Because I mean, that is the thing. And I'm going to put up a graph here just to show you that the situation is actually kind of interesting. If you look at the graph that I put up right now, in the 1950s, the average global fertility rate, so that's associated with the birth rate, right, was a little bit over 4.5 per woman. Okay. Because of course you always need a man and a woman. The woman is the bottleneck of births, because that's what they do. And more recently, near 2017, we're looking at somewhere about 2.4-ish, according to the graph, and that's approximately the same thing as now. But it's been decreasing. Now the question is, like, why has it been decreasing? Is it because we're sicker and we're giving birth to sick or dead children? No, children are actually healthier than ever when we do give birth. It's just women give birth to fewer children. Now that means that there's a decision that's made not to have children. There's also the presence of contraception, and those are the two main factors, and the affluence as well. And that's the third factor, the affluence of a society. So a woman that is well informed is affluent, so has sufficient money to take care of herself and whatnot, and has access to contraceptives, typically has way fewer children than those women that don't have access to those things. And the birth rate has been decreasing because more and more countries have access to those things, at least have it for their women. There still have a bunch of countries that are culturally a little bit behind the pace, or technologically a little bit behind. There's no internet, perhaps not accessible, so information is not there. Contraceptives are maybe hard to come by. In some countries, the woman doesn't have a lot of choice as well, so that compounds to it. So these countries tend to have a very high birth rate. So that's typically a lot of countries in the Saharan Africa, Sub-Saharan. You got some countries in Southern Asia and that still have very high birth rates. Some countries in some areas in South America and so on. But if you look at what we call developed countries, like in Europe, North America, and many countries in Asia, birth rates are really low, and sometimes, like in the case of South Korea, below 2, so in decline. And that makes our average at approximately 2.4. Now, the good news is that if you look at the graph, it's been a constant decline since the 1960s. And because internet adoption is increasing all over the world, and you have more and more people connected, getting informed and getting access to money, microtransaction, like blockchain, for example, is continuously, these last couple of years, have been giving access to people that did not have access to banks or a bank account, access to funds where they could use those funds to either educate, buy contraception, or generally just feel more empowered within their finances. So that's the optics of affluence, right? The more affluence we have, the lower the birth rate. So my solution is not like what Elon Musk wants to do, is to ship people to another planet like Mars and to another colony, kind of offload some of the overpopulation to somewhere else, and kind of you perpetuate the issue elsewhere. So that's not really a good issue. It's legislation can work temporarily, can work if there's consensus. That could be okay, but generally, I believe that if we continue increasing the connectivity with of the internet, enabling women to have access to money and contraception, we have to deal a little bit with religions that still teach that contraception is evil, for example. With all that progress, we'll probably reach the 2 area, because if we have an average birth rate of 2 on the planet, then the population is balanced. And then it could be a consensus to say, okay, well, what we want on the planet, let's say at that point when we reach the area of 2, maybe we're at 9 billion in population, maybe we'll decide, well, let's bring it down to 7 over the next 50 years or so. And then we can have maybe little measures of controls here and there by consensus to kind of bring it down. And as we add technologies that use up less of the arable farmland, like I described before, with a maintained population that is more reasonable, then we can have more wild spaces on the planet grow, and that's very healthy for us all. And we can kind of relax on the whole overpopulation issue. And so I would focus, instead of focusing on there's too many people, let's focus on the solution, which is primarily education. So let's get that done. All right, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and like the video if you like it. Comment, please, if you want to issue a comment. I'll be happy to respond to you. Bye for now.